Sir, you're charged with especially aggravated kidnapping. You're also charged with aggravated assault, and you're charged with theft of a firearm worth less than $2,500.
You're talking about stuff that is not relevant.
Hello and welcome to the Court of Public Opinion. I am the Recovery Addict, and boy do I have a case for you today.
Why is the dog chewing on this guy?
I think they have got the wrong guy there.
Got the wrong guy, and the dog was biting him.
He roughened him up quite a bit. There's a lawsuit.
9 out of 10 judges prefer watching the Recovery Addict live stream in their courtroom.
The fireworks are not done.
Now we're getting commentary on the case. Dati mihi Anglican for his purpose.
Is that correct?
Literally not true.
Oh, for crumb's sake. I didn't ask you to interrupt me.
Welcome back. Welcome to the Court of Public Opinion. I am the Recovery Addict. Thank you very much for joining us here this morning, almost this afternoon. For the East Coast, it is afternoon. I'm still morning. We are waiting. Court is about to begin in the Robert Tellis trial. This is going to begin day 3 of that trial. It has been crazy spicy. Why is it so spicy? It's been crazy. We've got a lot of strong personalities in this court and some crazy fact patterns that will just will blow your mind. All right, let me get everything positioned where I need it. Box 2 is going to be 6. I think no 5. There we go. All right, so we need a counter in place. We have the counter. This is the any body count. There we go. And we need me down here in the corner. All right, we're ready. We're ready to kick off court. Nothing happening yet. So we'll be there probably shortly. I need to adjust a bunch of things. Switching from one trial to the other requires, there's a full different set of, I don't even know how to describe this. There's a whole bunch of different settings I need to change because the audio workout in the court is completely different. And yes, it is a workout, 100%. But this trial is absolutely wild. If you've not watched any of this trial, it's worth stepping in. I will say it's also worth going back and rewatching. You can start now, and we'll get you caught up. But you're going to want to go back and watch from the openings on, and that's not even talking about all the pretrial stuff, which was just nuts. There was a time where this defendant was pro se, where he was being a lawyer, where he wanted to represent himself. Judge basically told him. I think she actually literally told him he was an idiot or stupid for wanting to do that. There were motions to dismiss, everything else because of that. But he did follow the judge's advice, has a lawyer. The lawyer is doing a good job. Unfortunately, the facts appear to be against him in a big way in this case, like big way, especially if you listen to the opening statements, what the state says they have against him. It's like... It's something you might see in a dunk contest. It is slam dunk. It's like, and we have a new winner. You know, they're posterizing the defendant with all this evidence. It is a slam dunk. If what they say is true. Of course, defendant saying he's not guilty and there's somebody else who did it. Yes, it's this gruesome, just brutal stabbing, attacking this guy, laying in wait, stabbing him. It was captured basically on video, although the actual attack is not, you can see the two come together, but you can't actually see the attack in the footage. But you can see all sorts of security camera footage about where the defendant was, or allegedly, leading up to that attack, as well as where the victim was and how they came together and how the assailant came back to the crime scene and went right back to where the body was and then left again after the attack. Just crazy stuff. So we expect to see a lot more video in here. The defense has chosen to attack let's see if we got any audio from the court yet. Don't think we do. The defense has chosen to attack the process, the investigation. This is someone who was a public administrator. Robert Tellis was an elected public official in Las Vegas. He was a public administrator. Part of what he did, sounds like there may have been houses that were being rehabbed and fixed up that might have been taken over by the state. Like I don't know exactly how the public side, why the government took over these houses. They'd fix them up and try to sell them. So they were working with real estate agents. They were working with repair crews around houses. Robert Tellis was very involved in that process, so he would do walkthroughs. We've heard from a couple of those people that he worked with who knew him, who did business with him for a while. There was a little argument, some tension between one of them about the prices of things. When everyone's working on the same project and one side says, hey, you need to take less as your cut, that's a point of friction that occurred. But also in the defense's opening, we heard an amazing, I say amazing, but it was atrocious, a phone call that was left on the victim's phone from somebody who used all the swear words in a row. I think he might have had 100 swear words on like a 45-second voicemail. And it was just my ears are still ringing from that. It was absolutely crazy. There's clearly people that didn't like the victim, and that wasn't the voice of the defendant on the phone. And defense is saying, look, this is evidence enough. This is reasonable doubt. It wasn't us. There were other people out there. Now, granted, we do have video of a car that looks a lot like the one the defendant owned or his wife owned. We do have a lot of evidence, including evidence that has been tried to be cut up and defaced, damaged, destroyed with blood DNA evidence on it that was found at the defendant's home. We've got all these other things that sure point the finger towards the defendant, but they're saying, look, it wasn't us. We've been framed, and so it's going to be spicy. It has been spicy already. The judge is great. The prosecutors are great. These are the same prosecutors we saw in the Thami trial. The gentleman who hired a handyman basically to shoot his wife, and then he shot the handyman to clean up all the evidence. He was convicted. We've seen that before. These prosecutors are doing a great job on this one as well. So that's what we have coming up today. With that, I still have a little bit of fixing to do to get everything working. Let's see, where's camera 6? Camera 6 is right here. Okay. Hold tight for a minute while we... Let's see. I basically started before I was ready. Which, if you've followed me for any length of time, is my recommendation for anyone who wants to start live streaming on YouTube. Start before you're ready. There's never going to be a day where you think, okay, now I've got everything in a row. Now I can start. I've got all my pieces lined up and my ducks in a row. Never happens. Just start now and you'll learn from it. All right. Let's see. We finished the Susan Lawrence. The jury is deliberating right now. That's continuing. I'll give you updates periodically, but if you hear anything about an update that I miss, let me know on the burner phone. In that case, jury's been deliberating for just under 30 minutes in that trial. All right. You can see the Mountain Dew is kicking in. Bottle number 1 is just about gone. I do have 2 spares. Yes, I've fallen off the wagon, I admit. I quit for a long time, and I need to quit again. All right. I need... Try to get all the feeds lined up with the audio the way we want it, which is how I want it and how I think you would want it as well. So we're meaning that we can hear. Is that too much to ask? I like to have a fallback safety as well in case there's a connection problem. Nothing there. I think we've got the court has been late to start every day. So far, and even coming back from lunches, they've been late to start. So we never really know what time they're going to be. What time they're going to be kicking things off here. There's 2. Just need one more computer. That's all. I'm used to having another feed available to me, and I just don't. But that's all right. And by feed, I mean different source throughout the video in case something goes wrong on the first chain. Where were we? I guess we can open the phone lines a little bit until court begins. If you'd like to, give your thoughts on this case, the Robert Tellis case. I think one point that a lot of people have made a lot of comments on is the defendant and his appearance in court. As we've watched so many videos multiple times of the assailant arriving, driving around, arriving and re-arriving and leaving the scene, the attack, everything. The defendant has been watching keenly, but in doing so, he also has, I would say, been trying to look a certain way as he is watching. I haven't caught him looking at the jury very much at all. The jury is off to his left. Like, he would have to look like this to see the jury. And we haven't seen that very much at all. I don't know if he just does not want to make eye contact or if he doesn't know, how to look if he looks at the jury. I'm sure he's curious about what they're thinking. But
from misconduct.
Misconduct. Fun and funky, right? How are you doing?
Hi. I'm good, thank you. You remembered I changed my name.
Yes, it's terrible for me because everyone changes their name and I have no clue who they are. But yours, I do remember. How are you doing today?
Well, I'm good, thank you. It's my Friday evening. I have a glass of wine and I have RA on the TV.
There you go. What more could you want, right?
What more could you want? And I've got next door's dog, so,
wonderful.
I'm living the dream. Not spoken to you for a while, not commented for a while, been busy, but been watching. So just thought I'd ring in and say OMG about Robert, is it Robert Tellis?
Yes, Robert Tellis.
Why do people keep pronouncing it like it's a Spanish Tellis?
Well, first of all, this is in Las Vegas, so this is a southwest United States. There is a large influence of Spanish speaking people in the area, and 2 L's does make a Y in the Spanish language. So, think of chicken. I call it polo, but pollo.
Sorry to interrupt. I appreciate that and I understand that, but how does he pronounce it? Because surely they should say it how he pronounces it.
Well, here's what I've been thinking. Some of these people don't like him. and they might be intentionally mispronouncing it in a correct way based on understandings in the area. And we've heard that even as prosecutors said it one way and a witness has said it the other way, back and forth. And so it's sort of funny that way. I think that might be it. It's like our way of doing a little jab at you.
Oh, a little spicy. Okay, I like that.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I in the past have watched other creators do like 30-minute summaries of it well before it came to trial, and back then I thought, yeah, I'm not keen on this guy. So it's hard to be objective with him for me, I'm afraid.
It's I understand. I understand entirely. This one looks bad for him. I don't know how else to say that. He looks quite guilty. We've got audio coming in from court, so I'm going to let you go. I've still got to make some tweaks to bring it on, but
yep. Good to speak to you. Have a good weekend.
Thank you. We'll see you, Fun and Funky, or misconduct. All right. Bye-bye.
Mr. Governor had to step out, but with your permission, I can just start.
Sure.
Okay, give me a second. I've got audio but no videos. Just 1 second.
Alicia Barton.
Alicia Barton's being called in by the state, and the other state attorney is out of the room. Okay, I'm struggling with our overlay is the problem. The super source. Box 4 is going to be channel 2. Okay, we're almost there. Just 1 second.
Watch your step. Remain standing. Raise your right hand, please, clerk.
You do solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in this action shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
You may be seated. Please state and spell your first and last name for the record.
Anastasia Barton, ANASTASIA BARTON.
That's a name.
How are you employed? I am a forensic scientist trainee at the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department Forensic Laboratory in the biology and DNA detail.
And how long have you worked there?
I have worked for Metro for approximately 8 years. I've held various positions during that time frame. I started as a forensic laboratory assistant, and then I promoted to forensic lab aide in October of 2016 until I promoted to forensic laboratory technologist in the biology and DNA detail in July of 2018. And I held that position for approximately 4.5 years until I promoted to forensic scientist training, and that is my current title. I've had that title for approximately 2 years.
Okay, so it sounds like in 2022 you were a forensic technologist for the DNA lab?
Yes, that is correct.
For Metro?
Yes.
What does that person do, a forensic technologist?
A forensic laboratory technologist is the person who will receive items of evidence, examine them for the possible presence of bodily fluids or DNA, test those items for DNA and put them through a lab processing. And once a DNA profile is generated, that is when a forensic scientist comes in to interpret the data that came from the samples that I have lab processed.
So you're coming in contact as a forensic technologist with the actual evidence, like swabs or actual physical pieces of evidence?
Yes, that's correct.
And you receive that evidence in sealed evidence bags?
Yes, that's correct.
Is part of your responsibilities checking to make sure that the bag is properly sealed and no one has tampered with it before you open it and start dealing with the evidence?
Yes, that's correct.
When you are dealing with the evidence, are you wearing like regular clothes, or do you wear some sort of protective clothing in order to avoid contamination?
I wear personal protective equipment, and that is my lab coat, my face mask, as well as my gloves. We also use sterile procedures in the form of cleaning our bench space and laying down sterile filter paper and always working evidence before known samples.
And when you say always working evidence before known samples, can you explain for the members of the jury what that means and why that's important?
Yes, evidence samples are items of evidence that are collected from a crime scene. They are also known as question samples sometimes, and that is because we don't know the source of whose DNA could possibly be on them. They are from a crime scene. Whereas a reference standard or a known, or usually it's called a buccal swab, those are known samples because we know where they came from. If a buccal swab is submitted, that is a standard. It is coming from inside the person's cheek. So they take a cotton tip swab and they'll swab the inside of that person's mouth. And it is considered a known standard, a reference standard, because I know whose cheek it was collected from.
And so obviously it's important to keep reference samples separate and apart from questioned evidence to avoid any possibility of contamination?
That is correct.
Okay. Now, when you get an item of evidence that, say, is like a swab or a cutting or something like that, what does it look like when you're doing your work, or you were doing your work as a forensic technologist?
The item of evidence, it really depends on what it is. First, there are different packages that an item may be placed and contained inside. Bigger items might be in a cardboard box or a paper bag. Smaller items could be in manila envelopes. So you start by examining the outside of the package first and documenting the seals and the integrity of the package to make sure it's intact. And then, depending on what the item is, when you open the package, you will verify that whatever is listed on the outside of the package, there will be like an inventory of the items that is inside that package. You will verify that anything that is in that package is correct with what you were expecting and what was requested for analysis. So usually like swabs, smaller items, there will be smaller envelopes inside of a larger outside envelope.
Okay. And then do you do something with the items of evidence, like put them in a test tube, or how do you extract the potential DNA source?
Yes, any sample that I take, depending on if it's a cutting I have taken or I've consumed an entire swab for my testing that has been submitted, they will all go into a test tube, and there will be a reagent blank that is controlling for that sample, for that extraction set, and those will all be in tubes from that point. So the item of evidence is separate from the extraction.
Okay, and there's sort of a control within that to make sure that the testing went through correctly and that there wasn't any kind of variability in the testing?
That's correct. I believe I mentioned reagent blank when I mentioned extraction. Those are samples that have absolutely no DNA in them. They are just part of the sample set. So I'll have maybe 10 samples that I'm working. There are 10, swabs, for example, that I've cut. So there's 10, and then there's 2 reagent blanks that are initiated. So all of the reagents, all the chemicals that I am adding for that extraction process will be added to all of them. So that ensures that the chemicals that we are introducing into all of the samples, we have control for them. We know that there's not expected to be DNA present in those because it's just a regular blank tube with those chemicals.
Okay, and so you can tell if everything's functioning properly because if your reagent blank showed the presence of DNA, you would know like something went wrong in the testing process?
That is correct. The reagent blanks are a method to check our quality control to make sure that a blank is blank, that there is no DNA detected in that sample. We also have negative and positive controls later on in the process to ensure, again, that the chemicals that we're using, that they're working properly, and as well as our instruments are working properly.
Okay, so I want to talk about this case now. What items of evidence did you work on or conduct, I guess, the forensic testing process on in terms of this case?
For this case, I was requested to examine fingernail clippings from the right hand and the left hand of the decedent, as well as a swab from the right hand and the left hand, a swab from a left ankle and a left foot. And there was also a reference standard, that is that known sample that was submitted, and that was from the decedent Jeffrey Gehrman.
Okay, so all of your samples were fingernail clippings, hand swabs, a swab from the left ankle, and a buccal swab from Mr. Gehrman himself.
There was also a left foot.
Left foot,
yes.
Sorry.
Yes.
Thank you. All of those, fair to say, were collected at the autopsy of Mr. Gehrman?
Yes.
Okay, and all of those items, I assume, are separated by location, like the left fingernail clippings aren't thrown in with the right fingernail clippings, that sort of thing?
Correct. Everything that is impounded is expected to be in its own separate package, and if I were to notice some kind of discrepancy, it would have been documented. A CSA or a detective would have been notified. But in this case, the items that were listed on the outer package matched the description of the envelopes that I received, and everything was packaged separately. So the right fingernails were in a separate envelope from the left hand fingernails, from the right hand, from the left hand, and then there was a separate package that had the left foot swab and the left ankle swab and the swab from the decedent, Jeffrey Gehrman, was also in a separate package.
Okay, I've missed the body count. Have I missed anything?
Keep all of those samples from the various locations separate when you're doing testing as well?
Yes, that is correct. We and I only examine one item of evidence at a time, and that is to ensure that we're keeping the integrity of our work process. So once I am starting and finishing up an item of evidence, I will change my gloves. I will clean that bench space. I will lay down a new filter paper, and I do this every single time for every single case.
Okay. So when you are working with an item of evidence, and in this case, the items that you just listed, do you do any kind of preliminary test for the presumption of blood?
Yes.
And can you explain to the members of the jury what that is?
When there is a stain that is indicative that the stain could possibly be blood, usually there'll be a stain on an item that would have a reddish-brown color to it. I will perform what is known as a PT test. It is a chemical test for blood, and what that is a color test. So I will test a small portion of like a stain, if there's a stain present, and if the color changes pink, then it is positive, and it is a presumptive test. So it was positive for the presumptive blood test, and if there's no color change, then it is just negative. It's a negative presumptive blood test.
So I want to leave aside the reference sample, the buccal swab of Mr. Gehrman, yes. But in terms of the swabs of the hands, the fingernails, and the left ankle and left foot, what were the what did that presumptive test reveal about those items of evidence in terms of whether they were presumptive for blood?
All those tests turned pink, so there was indication that it's positive. So it was documented to be positive presumptive blood test for all those samples.
Okay. And you said that you also had the buccal swab of Mr. Garriman. I assume that wasn't positive for blood. That came from his mouth?
That was not tested for blood. That would not provide any contextual information if the decedent was bleeding or not. And that is just cut and processed into the extraction process.
Okay. And you, at the time you were doing your testing, did you have a reference sample from someone identified as Robert Tellis?
I did not.
Okay, so you only had the samples collected from autopsy?
I also received, there were handbags that were packaged, but those were not requested for analysis, so they were documented as being in the package and received but not examined. And I also received a package that had shoes, but they were not requested for analysis.
Okay. After
Keisha
I
Pickerel,
assume you
or
did
Kedia,
testing on
as I often call you.
all those items
Congratulations,
for
you won the
DNA,
internet.
presence of DNA.
Yes, all the items that were requested.
All the items that were requested, which included the swabs of the hands, the fingernails, and the left ankle and left foot?
Yes.
Okay. After you complete your testing, there's data generated on each of those items. Is that fair?
That is fair to say. We do have several steps throughout the lab processing. The first step can be the screening process. The second would be extraction, where we apply chemicals and heat in order to break those cells open. And then there's a quantitation step to determine the amount of DNA that may be present in those samples. And that gives us an indication of the quality of the sample, whether or not there's inhibition present or degradation present. There's different values that can be interpreted. And then there are additional steps like amplification, where we make many copies of that sample in order to have enough DNA to produce a profile. And lastly, we put it on an instrument to generate a DNA profile. So in this case, I sampled the items, I extracted them, I put them on the instrument for quantitation, but I did not interpret the data or continue the lab processing portion going forward. Another person in the lab, a forensic scientist, stepped in and continued that process.
Okay, yeah, you got my next question. So that very last step of the interpretation, that was done by a different individual at the Metro Lab?
Yes, it was.
Okay. Could I just have the court's indulgence for 1 second? I think that is it. Thank you. I will pass the witness.
Thank you. Cross-examination?
Yes, thank you. Ms. Barton, at the time that you performed these tests, you were acting as a forensic laboratory technologist trainee, correct?
No, that is not correct. I was a forensic laboratory technologist. My current position is forensic scientist trainee.
Okay, so you're currently then a forensic trainee as we speak?
Yes, I am finishing up the 2-year process, at which point I will promote to forensic scientist 1.
You had testified that presumptive blood tests were performed upon the samples provided to you.
Yes, I did.
Those were of the hands of the decedent?
Those were on all of the evidence samples that I have tested, the fingernail clippings and all of the swabs from the hands, the left and the right, the left ankle and the left foot. Those were all tested for the possible presence of blood.
Now, as to the presumptive blood tests on the hands, were they from both the left and right hands, or were there separate presumptive tests as to each hand?
Each hand. They were individually packaged, so one was worked separately from the other. So when I take my bench paper and I open my envelope and I describe what it looks like and I document the staining present, at that point I will make certain determinations for if there's staining present. Do I want to test this for the possible presence of blood? Yes, I do. It's characteristic of possibly containing blood, and I will test that sample. I will cut it and put it in the tube, at which point everything goes away. The envelope, the swab, envelope that contained that swab will go into that package. I will bleach down my area. I will lay down a new filter paper. Then that next sample comes out once that area has been cleaned and a bench paper has been applied. Then I will start the process over again, documenting what that staining is, what that swab looks like, or fingernail clippings, whatever was submitted. I start over kind of fresh. So those were tested for the possible presence of blood separately.
As to the hands, was there a presumptive positive for both the left hand and the right hand?
Yes, that is correct.
As far as the fingernails, was there a presumptive test done on each fingernail, or were the fingernails grouped together?
The fingernails from each hand were grouped together. So there were fingernails from the right hand and the left hand. So each individual fingernail was not collected separately. It was collected by hand. But the left and the right were in separate envelopes. Yes.
Same question concerning the left ankle. Presumptive positive, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
But not the right ankle, or that was not submitted to you for presumptive testing?
That's correct. I didn't receive a request for analysis for a right ankle.
Same question concerning the left foot, presumptive positive?
Yes.
For blood?
Yes, that's correct.
Nothing was submitted to you for the right foot?
That's correct. It was not requested for analysis.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you.
Just one question. Ms. Barton, you said you're a trainee for Forensic Scientist 1.
I'm a Forensic Scientist trainee. It is the entry-level position of that classification. Forensic Laboratory Technologist has different job duties and responsibilities, as I've described, receiving the evidence and doing the lab processing. When you become a Forensic Scientist, you're then trained on analyzing data and statistics, calculations, and report writing. So I kind of shift gears a little bit. However, I can perform the entire process all the way through. I am fully trained.
Okay. And the person who, in this case, who ended up analyzing the data that you got from these items of evidence, that's sort of the job that you're going to have next, right? The interpretation.
Yes, that's correct. It's the job I currently do. I do perform interpretation. However, my classification is trainee. I have finished the training program. I am signed off for independent casework. I have taken qualifying exams and proficiency tests even in order to test my competency in that skill set that I have developed since promoting.
Thank you. No other questions, Your Honor. Thank you.
We have no follow-up. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you so much.
Today. You may step down and you're excused from your subpoena. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
And the state may call our next witness.
The next witness, Your Honor, is Melanie Clovenett.
You can do a quick audio test, jumping back in time just for a second.
I do perform interpretation. However, my classification is
Okay,
trainee.
I've got better settings on this.
The training program. I am signed off for independent
If you guys are okay with
casework.
me using.
I have taken qualifying exams.
I've got to stay back here though,
Even in order to test my competency in that skill set that I have developed since promoting.
Thank you. No other questions, Your Honor. Thank you.
So we're back in a minute or so, if that's all right.
Thank you so much.
You may step down and you're excused from your subpoena. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
And the state may call our next witness.
The next witness, Your Honor, is Melanie Clovenett.
Crank the volume a tiny bit. It's just cleaner. It's a little quieter, but I can fix that. They're calling Melanie out in the hallway right now. Sorry, I have been ignoring chat. I do apologize. Was not trying to ignore anybody. Keisha Pickrell, thank you very much. You won the internet this morning. Greeners, thanks for recognizing her with a huge super chat. I've been working on this audio while playing the other one and adjusting the screens and everything to make it work. I think we're there, so I'm about to be focused on chat again.
You do solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in this action shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
You may be seated. Please state and spell your first and last name for the record.
Melanie Kolenovic, MELANIKOLJENOVIC.
Oh, good gracious. She has all the letters.
How are you employed?
I'm a forensic laboratory forensic scientist employed with the biology DNA detail at the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department.
How long have you worked in the DNA lab?
I've been full-time since January of 2020.
Okay. You were working in the lab then in 2022?
Yes.
Okay. And your position, what does that mean you did day to day?
When I started in 2020, I was a forensic laboratory technologist, which consisted of receiving items of evidence, screening or examining them, and then performing lab processing on them. Currently, I'm a forensic laboratory scientist trainee, which consists of the same thing, except I'm also in training to be a forensic scientist.
And the last part of the training would be the person who analyzes the data?
That's correct.
When you were a technologist, you were handling items of evidence and doing extractions and that sort of thing on it?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. We just heard from your colleague describe that process, so I'm probably not going to repeat that with you. In 2022, though, you were the technologist, so you were dealing with items of evidence?
Yes.
Okay. And just so we're clear, when you were dealing with items of evidence, did you wear any kind of protective clothing in order to avoid contamination or that sort of thing?
Yes, I wear a lab coat. My hair is kept up in a bun away from my shoulders and my face. I also wear a mask, and I wear gloves, which I change regularly throughout the examination and lab processing process.
Okay. Now, in this case, you were dealing with several items of evidence. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Okay. Can you give us I don't know if you have it memorized or with counsel's permission, if she could refer to a report. Can you kind of list out the items of evidence that you dealt with in this particular case?
I did perform 2 examinations of different unit records. Would you like both of them or just one at a time?
One at a time, I think.
Okay. May I refer to my report? Thank you. So for the first one, I received in one package a swab from the interior side of the left gray shoe, a swab from the bottom of a left gray shoe, swab from the interior side partial right gray shoe, swab from a piece of black, white, and gray rubber, swab from a handle of scissors, which was referred to as AB5, swab from handle of scissors, which was referred to as AB6. Another package contained a swab from an interior blade of a Husky folding knife. And then in another package was 5 tan straw hat pieces.
Okay. So let's
I
start
really hope
with
they put the hat back together.
shoes.
I want to see if it's all there.
I'm going to put on the overhead what's been admitted as states 263 and then states 272. Do those items look familiar to you?
They do not, because when I say a swab from, that actually means I just received like a cotton swab from the actual item. I did not receive the item or actually look at the item or determine where to swab. The swabs were given to me by the person who analyzed the shoe and swabbed that.
So we have testimony from a crime scene analyst who worked in the field. So sometimes they would swab a piece of evidence and then you just see the Q-tip or the swab that's been impounded?
Yes, that's correct.
And that's labeled for you so you know what the swab relates to. Is that fair?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So with regard to what was labeled to you as a left gray shoe, interior side, and then the bottom of the left gray shoe, did you do any presumptive tests for blood on what was identified to you as left gray shoe swabs?
Yes, I did.
And what were your findings?
May I please refer to my? Thank you. So for the interior left side.
The interior side of the left gray shoe.
And that's lab item 13.
That is lab item 13.
Okay. That was negative presumptive blood.
Okay. And what about from the bottom of that left gray shoe?
That was also negative presumptive for blood.
Okay. You also received a swab from the interior side of a partial right gray shoe?
Yes.
And also pieces, I'm going to put on the overhead now, states 274. What was identified to you as pieces of black, white, and gray rubber?
Yes.
With regard to, let's go back to the partial right gray shoe, what was that in terms of whether it was presumptive for blood or not?
The swab from the partial right shoe was the positive presumptive for blood.
And then putting again states 274, with regard to the pieces of black, white, and gray rubber, what was the presumptive, what did the presumptive test tell you?
Positive presumptive for blood.
Okay. In addition, you swabbed some scissors. Is that, or you received swabs from scissors?
I received swabs from scissors.
I got to get that straight. How were the scissors described to you, or well, they were identified, I guess, the swabs as AB5 and AB6. Is that fair?
Yes, specifically from the handle of the scissors.
Okay. I'm going to put on the overhead what's been admitted as States 259. And I think we can see there's a evidence marker there that says AB5. And then this is States 261, which also has a marker of AB6. With regard to those two swabs that you received, can you tell me whether or not they were positive presumptive for blood?
Both swabs for AB5 and AB6 were positive presumptive for blood.
Okay. And then you were asked to do a presumptive test on an interior blade of a Husky folding knife. I'm putting on the overhead States 256.
Oh, a folding knife.
What was your finding whether or not the knife was positive?
The knife was negative presumptive, or the knife swab that I received was negative presumptive for blood.
That might have been used to cut.
And so the scissors were positive, but just to be clear, the knife itself was negative.
The swab I received, yes, was negative.
Okay. You also received items or from a hat. This is States 285.
Those I did physically receive. So I physically received the hat pieces.
Okay. So you would have done the swabbing on those?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And I assume, well, actually, I should ask you, how do you do the swabbing on that type of item?
So this item was impounded differently than how this photo shows. So the items that I received all of them in a large box where each individual hat piece, as you see on the screen, was in its own individual brown paper bag. Per our policy, we do not have lab items opened at the same time. So with the approval from DNA management, because we didn't know where the interior lining of the hat would be, I had approval to swab the lining of each piece with one swab. So the way that looked, to keep with our procedures of not having multiple items opened at once, was I had clean butcher paper down, I was in my PPE, and I would open up one item, I would examine it to determine if there's any possible staining or to see if it had that interior lining that we were looking for. And then I would swab that with a clean swab, and that would go into a clean label tube. That hat piece would then be put away, the area would be cleaned, and another hat piece would be opened up to determine if there was a lining there. There was only 2 hat pieces that had lining, so the only 2 of them were swabbed with the same swab, and that went into one tube.
Okay. And with regard to the hat, did you do that presumptive test for blood?
On certain stains that I noted, but not on the swab itself.
Okay. And with the stains that you did do, what were the findings?
Those stains were negative presumptive for blood.
Okay. Now, you did additional work on other items of evidence. Is that fair?
That's correct.
Okay. And many of those items, or several of them, were swabs taken from a vehicle?
That's correct.
Okay. And so that's the same thing where obviously you don't have the car in front of you. You got swabs or like Q-tips of what was done by a crime scene analyst?
That's correct.
Okay. And did you also get or examine clothing that was collected?
Yes.
And I'm going to put on the overhead States 166. And did that clothing include Sperry shoes, like a right shoe and a left shoe?
Yes.
And did it also include a shirt and shorts?
Yes.
Okay. And then you also received swabs taken from the crime scene, or identified to you as taken from a crime scene?
That's correct, yes.
I'm putting on the overhead States 149. Now the swabs that you worked samples on with regard to those items, were they labeled to you as AB3, AB4, and AB5?
Yes, they were.
Okay, and they were identified as being taken from AB3 is a bush, AB4 is a bush, and AB5 is a butterfly?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, I want to kind of go back on these a little bit. The swabs that were all taken from the car, were any of those presumptive for blood?
They were all negative presumptive for blood.
Okay. Now, with regard to the Sperry shoes, what were the findings with regard to whether they were positive or negative for blood?
I identified several stains on the shoes, and of the stains I tested, they were positive presumptive for blood.
Okay. What about the T-shirt?
The T-shirt, also of the stains that I identified, were positive presumptive for blood.
And what about the shorts?
As well as the shorts, the stains that I identified were positive presumptive for blood.
Okay. I want to go back to States 149.
I'm monitoring the jury question.
These
in the
swabs
neighbor
that were
trial right
taken
now.
from AB 3, 4, and 5, which are the bush, and the butterfly.
Mm-hmm.
What were your findings with regard to whether they were positive presumptive for blood?
The two swabs from the bush, AB3 and AB4, were positive presumptive for blood, and the swab from the butterfly, AB5, was negative presumptive for blood.
Okay. And so on that one item, AB5, that, to be clear, that butterfly, which is like a lawn decoration, that one is negative, but the ones from the bushes were positive?
That's correct.
Okay. So after you completed that presumptive testing, I assume not obviously all at the same time, but all of the items that we've been discussing, you put in test tubes and went through the normal DNA
The court
processing?
is playing the
That's
911
correct.
calls in the other
And
trial
then
for the
once
jury right now.
that processing was done, does another analyst from Metro look at the data in the job that you're currently a trainee for, and does that person analyze the data?
Yes, she does.
Was there any discrepancy or anything unusual in the testing process that occurred when you were analyzing these items?
No, not to my knowledge.
If anything, if you were to see something happen with like a reagent or something like that, does Metro policy and probably lab policy require you to take note of it?
Yes, and depending on it, we will also document it. And if anything is not caught, it will also be in our review documents. That's available in the case file.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'll pass the witness.
Yes, thank you. And we'll start with the end of your testimony and work towards the beginning. In reference to the items of clothing recovered from Mr. Gehrman, you had testified that the shoes were tested, presumptive test for blood, and both shoes, that topsiders were both positive for blood.
Yes. Do you mean, Mr. Gehrman's shoes?
Yes,
The ones
Mr.
I
Gehrman's
physically,
shoes,
yes.
yes. And the shirt that was worn by Mr. Gehrman, presumptive test, blood.
Yes.
Same thing with the shorts, presumptive blood test, positive for blood.
Yes.
In reference to the bushes, it was specifically AB4, AB3, again, presumptive positive blood.
Yes.
And that would have been the area based upon the diagram surrounding Mr. Gehrman's body.
To my knowledge, yes.
Let's turn your attention now to the vehicle. You were called upon to conduct presumptive tests for blood.
Yes.
It was a
tracking the
subject
body
vehicle.
count,
Do you know
right?
the type, the make, or just that it was from a vehicle?
It usually just says V1 or Vehicle 1 when describing the vehicle.
And just so we're clear, the swabs that you received and tested presumptively for blood were negative.
That's correct, yes.
The straw hat, the multiple pieces, you tested presumptively negative for blood.
The stains that I located were presumptive negative for blood, yes.
Were those swabs also taken in order to test later for DNA?
No. For the sampling process, due to only looking for possible trace DNA, the staining was just in case if I saw anything, and due to them being negative presumptive, I did not take them forward. However, the stains are still available if you would like them to be tested.
So just so we're clear, then the hat was not tested for DNA.
I like that.
The hat
Stains are still
lining
available
was
for one time.
tested, but it was not tested for, well, it was tested. The stains that I noted were tested for possible blood.
Okay, but nothing more.
Besides the possible trace DNA, nothing more.
Okay. And again, we're talking about the lining versus the exterior. The lining was obviously tested for DNA.
Yes, the exterior was not.
Okay. Was it, and nothing was found as far as DNA concerning the interior of the band of the hat? Or there was, but it was very weak?
The findings of the DNA would be better explained by the forensic scientist who interpreted the results.
Fair enough. As to the knife, presumptive negative, correct?
That's correct.
Now, the scissors handle was presumptive positive.
Yes, for both of the swabs.
But as far as the blades, the cutting part,
I did not receive the cutting part of the scissors, so I am unable to say.
in reference to the shoes, the left gray shoe, presumptive negative.
You mean the shoe pieces?
The shoe pieces.
I'm sorry, can you please say which lab item it is?
Yes. In order for just easy to work, you tested two shoes, correct? The gray shoes.
Yes.
One shoe was whole, the other was cut to pieces.
Yes, one pair of shoes I physically received, the other pair of shoes or shoe pieces I only received swabs from.
Okay. If you could narrow down your testimony concerning the shoe pieces.
Okay, yes.
Presumptive positive?
Some were not. So 2 of the pieces of the shoe were negative presumptive for blood, and 2 of the pieces of the shoe were positive presumptive for blood.
Can you tell the court what other substances other than blood may create or cause a presumptive positive?
There could be rust. Rust is also known. There are false positives in cases of
bleach.
I wouldn't say false positives because it's still blood, but animal blood can also be positive but will produce no DNA results due to us having a human-specific DNA testing kit, but they can still show presumptive positive blood.
And in reference to these findings, we can't necessarily date whether that rust or animal blood or perhaps human blood had been there, correct?
That's correct.
Now, as to the other shoe, the whole shoe, presumptive negative.
The Mr. Gehrman's shoe?
No, we're talking about, we already addressed Mr. Gehrman's shoes, the Perry topsiders.
I've only received, the naming that I have doesn't say which shoe is whole. I apologize. It says swab from interior side of left gray shoe. Is that the one that
Correct.
Okay. Both of those for the interior left side of the gray shoe and the swab from the bottom of the left gray shoe were both negative presumptive for blood.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Just briefly, I just wanted to ask a couple clarifying questions about the hat. The hat and hat pieces, there's 2 parts of it, as I understand your testing. The first is you swab the lining of the hat to maybe get a wearer profile, if you could.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and then there was staining on the outside that you thought possibly could be blood, but when you tested it, it was negative presumptive for blood?
That's correct, yes.
And so the outside that was negative presumptive for blood, that wasn't moved forward for additional DNA testing. Is that fair?
That's correct. And the stains are still available on the hat for additional testing if necessary.
Okay, but the wearer profile that maybe you'd get from the lining, that was further tested for DNA?
Yes, the swabbing taken from the inner lining was taken forward for lab processing.
Thank you. I have nothing else, Shauna.
Any cross?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your testimony here today. You may step down and you are excused from your subpoena. Thank you for being here. And the state may call the next witness.
Kimberly Dannenberger.
Emily Vandenberger or something similar to that. This is going to be probably the next person in the chain of custody of these tests. The next person up the one person who did the test, not just the presumptive, but the next step up. This defendant, his looks in court just get me every time. It's crazy.
Remain standing, raise your right hand, face the clerk, please.
You do solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in this action shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
You may be seated.
Big file with her.
Please state and
Half a
spell
ream
your
paper.
first and last name for the record.
Kimberly Dannenberger, Kimberly Dannenberger.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
She has DNA in
Ms.
her last name.
Dannenberger, how are you employed?
I'm employed with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department's Forensic Laboratory in the Biology DNA section.
How long have you worked there?
I have worked at the Forensic Laboratory for approximately 15 and a half years, and I've been within the Biology DNA section for approximately 13 and a half years.
And what is your job title?
I'm a forensic scientist.
Okay, and you've done that for 15 years, is that about right?
I've been doing casework for the past 12, so part of that 13 and a half years within the biology DNA section included training.
Okay. What is your educational background that allows you to work as a forensic scientist?
I have a Bachelor of Science degree from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas in cell and molecular biology. I also completed an approximate 16-month training program within the biology DNA detail. And that training program encompassed everything that I would need to do my job. So analyzing items of evidence, putting them through a series of lab processing steps, generating DNA profiles, making interpretations on those DNA profiles, making comparisons to any known individuals who have been submitted for that case, as well as report writing and generating statistics.
Okay. And have you testified before as an expert in the area of forensic science, specifically with regard to DNA?
I have testified before, yes.
How many times do you think you've testified?
Prior to today, I've testified 87 times.
Okay. Can you give us just kind of an
87?
overview of how DNA is used in a forensic setting?
So, just a little background. DNA does stand for deoxyribonucleic acid. It is what makes us who we are. It's the building blocks for each of us. So between two humans, approximately 99.9% of our DNA is the same, coding for everything that our body needs to do to function. It's that approximate 0.1% that makes us unique. So the type of analysis that I am doing is within that 0.1%. So coding for eye color, hair color, skin color, what makes each of us unique. So DNA analysis is looking at that kind of portion. We target very specific locations, but ultimately swabbings or samples are taken from items of evidence, submitted to a series of lab processing steps to generate a DNA profile.
Okay. And a person's DNA profile, is it the same regardless of where a sample is from versus like a buccal swab versus blood? Would those reveal on the same person the same DNA profile?
Yes, so depending on, DNA does persist throughout your body. So if I have a sample of blood and a sample of saliva, if it does come from the same person, will be the same DNA profile.
Okay, and what is meant by the term reference sample?
So reference sample is what we use in the laboratory to describe an item of evidence known as typically a buccal swab kit, but it's an item of evidence collected for the purposes of DNA from a known individual. So based on who the outside packaging says was collected from, we can say that this profile came from this individual.
Okay. Now, with regard to this particular case, did you prepare a series of reports with regard to various items of evidence that were collected in the Gehrman murder case?
I did, yes.
Okay. Now, did they span over several months?
Yes, in total, yes.
Okay. Now, on some of the reports, we've heard testimony from two forensic technologists that they handled particular items of evidence and ran it through DNA processing. I assume on those items of evidence you analyzed the data?
Yes, so for each of the reports that were authored, I was the analyst that did all the interpretation, regardless of who did the front-end processing and or sample collection.
Did you ever work with any of the original evidence or like evidence where you were the person doing sort of the sampling and that sort of thing?
For the original report, I did not have hands on the actual items of evidence. I did do part of the lab processing.
Okay, and with regard to the lab processing, what did you do? What items did you work on?
So we're talking about the original report, correct?
Well, actually, yeah, I'll back up. We'll just go in order.
Okay.
Let's start with your original report.
Okay.
And it was issued on, do you know what date?
May I refer to the report?
Thank you, Your Honor.
So the original report for this event number was issued on September 5th, 2022.
Okay. And so when you issued this report on September the 5th of 2022, there were various items of evidence that a forensic technologist took samples from that you later looked at the data and analyzed. Is that fair?
Yes, I did the analysis for these items.
Okay. And those items include a reference sample from Jeffrey Gehrman, right hand fingernail clippings, left hand fingernail clippings, a swab from the right hand, a swab from the left hand, swab from left ankle, and a swab from left foot, correct?
Yes.
At that time, on September the 5th, did you have a reference sample from Robert Tellis?
I did not.
Okay. So in this report, the only evidence that Metro was in possession of on September the 5th was these, well, there were probably other swabs impounded, but there was no reference sample for Robert Tellis yet obtained. Is that fair?
That is correct.
Okay. So let's talk about this first report and what your findings were. I want to talk about the left hand, the right hand, the left ankle, and the left foot. With regard to those items or those swabs, what were your findings with regard to DNA?
So referencing those items, referring to my report, those 4 items, the results were assuming Jeffrey Gehrman is a contributor, foreign DNA was not detected.
Okay. And with the left hand fingernail clippings, what was the finding with regard to that?
So for the swabbing from the left hand fingernail clippings, the conclusions were assuming Jeffrey Gehrman is a contributor, the DNA profile is consistent with a mixture, including at least 1 male. Due to the limited nature of the foreign component, it is unsuitable for interpretation, and no further conclusions can be made.
Okay, let's talk a little bit more about that, just so we're clear. So this, the left hand fingernail clippings, the DNA evidence was analyzed, and I think you said there was evidence of a mixture. Is that right?
That is correct, yes.
How does that look different when you have a mixture as opposed to a single source of DNA?
So when I'm doing DNA analysis, the profiles that I'm looking at, they're equivalent to like peaks on a graph. So visually, you can just visualize peaks on a graph. So when a sample is single source, depending on the number of peaks that I see and the data itself, I can make the conclusion this is from a single person. The more peaks that are added, I can then conclude that this is from a mixture DNA profile. So the mixture part is dependent upon the profile itself.
Okay. And in this case, there was an indication of a mixture, but I think you said it can't be interpreted further?
Yeah, so for this sample, a mixture was indicated. I was able to assume Jeffrey Gehrman on this sample. It's what we consider an intimate sample, so fingernail clippings from a person's body, there's a reasonable assumption that their DNA profile can be there. In this case, his profile was there. So the peaks that are left over, there wasn't enough for me to make any further conclusion. It's limited, so I can't do anything further.
Okay, and that's just sometimes how DNA turns out? You get data that can't be interpreted further just because of the nature of the sample?
Correct.
And are there factors that affect that, or it just depends on how it's collected, or what is collected, or environmental factors, anything like that?
There are lots of factors that can affect DNA analysis in general. I'm never going to know what kind of profile I'm going to get until I actually run the samples through our processing steps to generate a DNA profile. But in terms of what can factor in, amount of contact between 2 items, was it left out in the elements? These are just generalized factors, not specific to this case.
Sure.
Has there been any chemicals applied since the contact may have occurred? I think I said handling with something touching for a long period of time or just a short amount of time. Any environmental factors such as being left out in the sun or rain, etc. So in terms of generally for DNA, there are a lot of factors that can affect how much DNA is potentially still on an item of evidence by the time it is swapped for analysis, either by crime scene or by someone at the laboratory.
And you can't tell from lab results what may have affected whether or not there was more sample left or more interpretable sample left.
Correct. DNA can answer the questions of who potentially was a contributor to this profile, someone included or excluded, and I can answer the question as to where that profile came from, so the fingernail swabs, but I cannot answer timeline questions. I can't say how the DNA came to be on an item of evidence, when it came to be on an item of evidence, and why.
Okay, so let's go back to the September 5th report of 2022. You also analyzed the right hand fingernail clippings swab, correct?
Yes.
And what was your conclusion with regard to that on September the 5th?
So on September 5th, the interpretation was this was a mixture of 2 males. I did assume Jeffrey Gehrman. Again, these were fingernail clippings collected from his person, so there was a reasonable assumption that he was there given the data. And so the conclusions at that time on September 5th were assuming Jeffrey Gehrman is a contributor to the mixture DNA profile obtained, foreign DNA was detected.
Okay. And did you have enough DNA
big.
in that case to have a possible profile for that foreign DNA?
Thank you, Lindsay Bay.
Yes.
Appreciate the
Did
gifted
you know
membership.
whose it was?
No, at this time I only had one reference standard that had been submitted to the laboratory, and that was Jeffrey Gehrman.
So you have kind of this unknown profile associate, or well, in the same sample data as Jeffrey Gehrman's profile. Would that be fair?
Yes.
Okay. And so when you have an identifiable profile, but you don't know whose it is, are there databases that you can enter a profile in?
There are, yes. If the sample itself meets eligibility, then there are databases that we can use.
And was that profile entered into databases?
It was, yes.
And which one, or I mean, just generally, can you tell us which ones it was entered into?
This profile was searched, you're talking about the level, I'm sorry.
Of the identifiable foreign DNA profile, was that entered into any databases to see if it matched anything?
It was, yes.
And those would be national and local databases?
So for this case, it was able to be searched at a local level, a state level, as well as a national level.
And in all those databases, did you get any results about who could possibly be the source of that profile?
At that time, I did not know.
Okay. So let's move
database.
on to September the 7th.
DNA in a criminal database.
You ended up preparing 2 reports on September the 7th of 2022. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. So let's, I think, start with what items of evidence you actually received on September the 7th. On that date, did you receive a reference sample?
So, sorry, yes, so this is referencing supplemental number 2, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, yes. So first of that, September 7th, 2022, this is referencing my report as supplemental 2. I did receive a reference standard from Robert Tellis.
Okay, and that came to you in the form of an evidence envelope?
Yes, it came in the form of what's called a buccal swab kit. That is going to be a swabbing of the inside of one's cheek.
And September the 7th is the first day, I assume, that you had a sample from Mr. Tellis?
Yes.
Rena, thank you so much.
Did you analyze that
Keisha,
particular
thank you so much.
item, or did you actually process it, do the forensic processing of that buccal swab?
So for this supplemental, I did work this case from beginning to end.
And were you able to generate a profile from Mr. Tellis's buccal swab?
I was, yes.
And did you ultimately compare that to that unknown profile that came from the right fingernail clipping swab?
Yes, so this reference standard was compared to my original conclusions, to that original data. So that comparison was done.
And what were your conclusions then?
So for the comparison of the buccal swab from Robert Tellis to the swabbing from the right-hand fingernail clippings, there was support. So Robert Tellis was included as a contributor to that profile. And the probability of observing the mixture DNA profile is approximately 40.9 septillion times more likely if it originated from Jeffrey Gehrman and Robert Tellis than if it originated from Jeffrey Gehrman and an unknown random contributor.
40.9 septillion.
Can you kind of explain why DNA is reported out as a probability, or give us some context for that number?
So this number is what we call a likelihood ratio statistic, and it's the probability of the evidence. So it all relates back to the evidence. So the probability of the evidence, which is that swabbing from the right-hand fingernail clippings, compared to 2 different competing scenarios. So scenario 1 is that this DNA profile came from Jeffrey Gehrman and Robert Tellis. And scenario 2 is that this profile came from Jeffrey Gehrman and someone unknown, random. I don't have another buccal swab kit for them. So the probability of that evidence, given these 2 competing hypotheses, is the statistic. So there's more weight for the hypotheses or the scenario that it's Robert Tellis and Jeffrey Gehrman versus Jeffrey Gehrman and an unknown random contributor.
And that ratio, or that is numerically 40.9 septillion more times?
So that was the statistic, that the probability of the mixture profile is 40.9 septillion more times more likely if it's that scenario that I just talked about.
Okay. And that was reported out in one supplemental report from September the 7th. Is that correct?
Yes, that was all done on September the 7th. And again, that was using the original data that was reported out on September 5th.
Okay. And that evidence was originally Your colleague, Anastasia Barton?
Yes, so the report for September 5th, she was the one that had basically eyes on the evidence. She was the one that sampled from the evidence. She did start the lab processing steps that we go through. I did take over partway in the lab processing steps, so I did finish the lab processing and wrote the report. But she was the one that had the evidence. I never actually saw the physical evidence.
Okay.
Clippings, right hand, anything like that. You just have the data from that.
Yes, so I never handled the actual evidence.
Okay. Now, I want to move on to your second report from September the 7th, and it appears these were rocks with staining collected from the crime scene. There were 2 rocks and a swab from a bird bath. Put on the overhead state 149.
We're getting some audio dropout. I'm trying to supplement it with secondary
identified
audio.
or identified to you as AB is AB2 and AB6. Is that correct?
Yes, based on the impound information.
Okay, right. Like crime scene analyst collects it from the field, and then you have their label. Is that right? Yes. You're not going out to the field.
No, this is all based on the crime scene analyst, the description of their packaging.
Okay, and AB1 is described to you as a circular rock with staining, and AB2 is a rectangular rock with staining, and swab from AB6 is from a bird bath.
That is correct, yes.
Okay, let's talk about those 3 swabs. What were your conclusions with regard to them?
So all 3 of those items, so the rocks, I actually did the sampling myself, so I was the one that swabbed those 2 items, and then the swab was given to me, so crime scene swabbed on scene. All 3 of those items were consistent with 1 male contributor, and Jeffrey Gearman was included as a contributor on each of those items.
Was there any indication of a mixture on those items?
The conclusions for these were 1 male.
Okay. So you prepared another report, and this one I think was from, September 12th of 2022. Is that right?
That is correct, and this is supplemental 3.
Okay. So let me just make sure I have these items. And these items consist of what was identified to you as a left gray shoe, interior side, the bottom of a left gray shoe, partial right gray shoe, pieces of black rubber, and swabs from handles of scissors, and a swab from a knife. Is that right?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, so let's talk about those.
40.9
I'm putting on the overhead states 274 and
that's what, 21 zeros? Is that right?
So let's talk about the what was identified to you as the interior side of the left gray shoe. Were you able to get interpretable data from that?
Sorry, let me just referencing my report. So for the swab from the interior side of the left gray shoe, that was consistent with originating from 1 male contributor.
And were you able to include Mr. Tellis as the source?
Yes, he was included as a contributor to that profile.
And are you able to give us any kind of numerical context that similar to what you described for the right hand fingernail clippings?
Yes. So the probability of observing this DNA profile is approximately 1.34 octillion times more likely if it originated from Robert Tellis than if it originated from an unknown random contributor.
Okay.
So it's his blood on the shoe.
You also were dealing with, I guess this would be your lab item 15, a swab from the interior side of the partial right gray shoe?
Yes.
And I'll put on the overhead states 272. What was your finding with regard to that, the interior of that?
So the swab from the interior side of the partial right gray shoe was consistent with 1 male contributor, and Robert Tellis was included as a contributor to that profile.
And was Mr. Gehrman excluded from being a contributor on that shoe?
Yes.
You also analyzed or had data on black, white, and gray rubber. Is that right?
Yes, referencing lab item 16.
And what were your findings with regard to that?
So that was consistent with one male contributor, and Robert Tellis was included as a contributor to that mixture.
And
that profile.
And how about Mr. Gehrman?
He was excluded.
Okay. And I want to put on the overhead states 261 and 259, which are reported to you as swabs from some scissors. And they're labeled to you as AB5 and 6. Is that right?
That is correct, yes.
What were your findings with regard to the scissors?
So both of those were consistent with originating from one male contributor, and Robert Tellis was included as a contributor to those profiles.
Okay.
So he did have a cut finger.
Was Mr. Gehrman excluded?
Yes.
Let's talk about swabs from a hat.
His
that was
blood on the
identified to you as
scissors.
from a hat. This is states
His blood under the
285.
victim's fingernail on the right hand.
Did you look at DNA data generated from a swab from this, identified to you as swabs from this hat?
Yes.
And what were your findings there?
So this would be the inner hat piece. The DNA profile obtained is consistent with a mixture of at least 5 contributors, with at least 2 of those being male. Due to the complexity of the data, no additional conclusions can be made regarding this mixture profile.
And when you say complexity of the data,
so quick I can switch
in
sources.
non-scientific terms, does that mean there's just too much information there to make it interpretable? Or how, in your words, how would you put it as a scientist?
So based on the data that was obtained, there was an indication that there were at least 5 people present on this item of evidence. So once we hit the point where there's at least 5, that profile becomes too complex for us.
As a shared hat.
I cannot make any comparisons to any known reference standards, so I did not compare either Jeffrey Gehrman's DNA or Robert Tellis' DNA to this item of evidence. Once it was 5 people, at that point the interpretation stops. It is too complex.
Okay, and that's because there's just no indicator, there's a danger of interpreting data like that. It might not be reliable scientifically because there's just so much information, or?
Yeah, we can kind of relate it to there's just too much information, and also it relates back to based on validation data, and there's just too much.
Okay, so I'd like to move on to, I think your last report was from January 2nd of 2024?
Yes.
And you were given swabs from a vehicle, and then some swabs from clothing, and then also swabs that are reported to you as from some bushes at the crime scene?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, so all of the vehicle swabs, were you able to analyze the data as to those?
Yes, so every item of evidence that was sampled for this report did go on to DNA analysis, so DNA profiles were generated.
And what were the findings with regard to the swabs from the vehicle?
Did you want me to go through each?
Sure.
One? Okay. So referencing lab item 27, which is a swab from the interior driver door handle pull area, assuming Robert Tellis is a contributor, the DNA profile obtained is consistent with a mixture, including at least 1 male contributor. Due to the limited nature of the foreign data, it's unsuitable for interpretation, and therefore no further conclusions can be made.
Okay. The next one, well, actually, let me just do it this way. It might be a little shorter. In all of the vehicle swabs, was Mr. Gehrman excluded from all of those?
He was either excluded or what we call uninformative.
Okay. And when it's uninformative, can you explain for the members of the jury what that means?
Yes. So uninformative, when I have that reference standard and I'm comparing it to the evidence profiles, we generate a statistic. So similar to the statistic that I've already talked about. If that statistic falls into a certain range, it's in what we call an uninformative range. So I can't say, yes, this person is included as a contributor to this profile, and I also cannot say, yes, they are excluded as a contributor to this profile. It's a range where we just can't say one way or the other if they're included or excluded, and that all relates back to the statistical number that was generated for that comparison.
Okay. And is there any further testing that can be done that would clarify that, or this is just kind of what we're left with the data that we have?
As of right now, this is the interpretation that was made and the statistic that was generated.
Okay. And that includes all the swab, well, with some degree, like you kind of made some distinction that some of them were uninformative, but it's fair to say that there is never a positive identification of Jeffrey Gehrman's DNA in the Yukon.
Correct. Jeffrey Gehrman's DNA was not found to be individually included or support for inclusion based on the statistic and any of those swabs that came from the car.
Okay, and some of them were uninformative, so we don't know, we can't say he's included or excluded due to the sort of limitations on the data.
Correct. There's not sufficient support for either way.
Okay. So I'm going to put on the overhead now states 166. And these are other items that you analyze, which are Sperry shoes, a right shoe, a left shoe, a shirt, and some shorts.
Correct.
With regard to those items of evidence, were you able to generate data and draw conclusions?
Yes, so for all, pardon me, I'm referencing my report. For all the items of evidence from these items of clothing, so just to reference, that's going to be lab items 35, 36, 37, 38, the clothing samples. Those were all consistent with one male contributor, and Jeffrey Gehrman was included as a contributor to those profiles, and Robert Tellis was excluded.
Okay, so the DNA that is gathered off of these clothing items that we've discussed was consistent with one person, and that was Mr. Gehrman?
Yes.
Okay, lastly, in that last report, there were swabs that were taken from 2 bushes and a butterfly, is that right?
Yes.
And I'm going to put on the overhead states 149, and those swabs were reported to you as AB3, AB4, and AB5?
Spelled trial.
Yes, that is correct.
And what were your findings with regard to those swabs?
These swabs were all consistent with originating from one male contributor. Jeffrey Gehrman was included as a contributor to those profiles, and Robert Tellis was excluded as a contributor to those profiles.
Thank you very much. I'll pass the witness, Your Honor.
You want a break? Please. Okay, all right. At this time, we're going to take a recess. During this recess, you're admonished not to discuss or communicate with anyone, including your fellow jurors, in any way regarding the case or its merits, either by voice, phone, email, text, internet, or other means of communication or social media. Read, watch, or listen to any news or media accounts or commentary about the case. Do research, consult dictionaries, the internet, or reference materials. Do any investigation, test a theory, recreate any aspect of the case, or in any other way investigate or learn about the case on your own, or form or express any opinion regarding the case until it's finally submitted to you. We'll be in recess till 11. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, sir.
Recess till 11. We get a 14-minute break. I am 336 subscribers away from 60,000. Thanks for the question. Speaking of questions, in the bad neighbor trial, we've had 2 questions already from the jury. The first one came in 1 hour into deliberation, almost exactly 1 hour, and their question was, can we listen to both 911 calls? The answer was yes. They were brought out into court and they were able to play both the calls for the jury. Then the jury went back into deliberation. At 1 hour 35 minutes in, we had another question. The jury asked, can we get clarification on whether the door frame was damaged, how it was damaged, and by whom? And the court basically said, no, we can't answer your question. All the evidence has been presented to you. You can reflect on the testimony you've received and continue deliberation. So that's where we are. The jury is flying through this. I don't think they're going to be here for dinner. I think lunch at the best, and I think they've already had lunch. Maybe I think they're eating lunch. Yeah, they've eaten lunch and they're buckling up and getting down to work. So good stuff there. It's flying along. It's going really fast. I can't see what camera I have live right now for some reason. Camera. Hang on. This is a weird. My setup's doing funny things. Let's see. Box 3 is what? Box 3 is camera 6. All right. We've been fighting audio issues this morning, so I'm glad I have failovers, which I've synced up, so I can switch over at a moment's notice. But, oh man, crazy. The jury deliberation time in the bad neighbor trial, they're now at 1 hour 41 minutes, and they're going to be done here soon. At this rate, I don't think we're going to go to 3 hours. Let's see. 2 Bushes and a Butterfly is my country rock band name. I have no words, Adam. No words whatsoever. The testimony, this has been, I know it's sort of, anytime we get DNA testimony, it's given in a very matter-of-fact scientific manner. The numbers in this DNA testimony have been enormous. Basically, especially the one that was most impactful to me was when we heard the 49.1 or 49.9 septillion times more likely that the contributors for these 2 DNA profiles that were found mixed together on the right hand fingernail clippings of the victim were from the victim and from Robert Tellis, than by the victim and some other unknown person. Okay, do the math. Yeah, that's like if there's 1 grain of sand in the ocean. Okay, you realize that has like 4 more zeros than septillion. But all the grains of sand on Earth, they're saying it was this grain of sand and this other grain of sand, or some other random grain of sand. That didn't make sense. It was grain of sand A and grain of sand B, then all the other grains of sand on Earth. We know it. That's so close to 100%. Why they should be able to say 100%, but there's always that question out there because DNA, that's just the way it is. They can't say 100%. We've only seen one trial where the DNA expert said, yep, it was a perfect match. I can't remember which trial that was, but I loved it. It was funny. She probably got in trouble for it, though. Wow. My calculator can't do the math. It takes a lot of zeros to do that. Nothing is 100% in science. They always have that small factor. But if you took all the people on Earth, okay, let's do a quick check here, and let's get Siri involved so she can help us with this. Hey Siri, how many people live on Earth right now?
About 8 billion people live on Earth.
Okay.
This answer is from Wikipedia.
Thank you, Siri. I appreciate that. Props to Wikipedia on that one. 8 billion. 49 septillion is a lot more than that. So how many Earths full of people would it take to say that it's this, all the people on Earth? It's more likely that it's Robert Tellis's DNA than somebody from, how many Earths? Hey, Siri, divide 49 septillion by 8 billion.
Okay, I found this on the web for divide 49
She says,
septillion.
here's a long form calculator. I don't want to do the work. You do it yourself. Hey Siri, what is 49 septillion divided by 8 billion?
Sorry, I didn't get that. Could you restate the question?
Siri didn't come here to math.
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
Hey Siri, what is 49 septillion divided by 8 billion?
Sorry, I didn't get that.
Yeah, Siri's not going to play. Siri's not going to play. She's like, those numbers are too big. Do it yourself. Does anybody ask Alexa? I don't have an Alexa here to ask. I'm all Siri here. Did anyone's iPad actually do the math on that one? And can they, or does somebody actually want to punch it in the computer if your zero finger doesn't get too sore typing them all out? Let's see. 40.9 septillion is 40.9 times the number of snowflakes that fell on Earth in 1 year. And it's picking out, it's like, we know it's this snowflake. It's the victim and this snowflake. Wow. Lizzie Dog, it says something like this. I give up on math when they start introducing letters into it. I figure that's not math anymore. That becomes spelling. And I'm never good at that either. So. Ask how many billion in 1 septillion. I've failed like 6 times in a row with Siri this morning. I'm gonna give her a break. I think we're not on speaking terms right now. Alexa knows. That's way to worship. Let's see. The telling stuff here. This is absolutely. This is like irrefutable evidence. Okay, scientific proof that this is not like, well, I mean, there are some sciences that are disputed, right? Look at firearm and tool marking. The guys are like, well, I looked at it and matched it up, and it looks like it matches, and this looks like it came from that gun. Well, tolerances in construction of firearms have gotten so good that the argument is that one gun compared to the next gun produced on the same machines, one after another, are so similar that that might not be a science. It might not be as valuable a science as it was back when the machinery was less precise. So in that area, the science is not very good. When it comes to DNA, the science is just getting better and better. And yeah, it's like this is his blood. At this point, the defense, instead of saying, oh, it wasn't a match, I think they have to say, somebody stole my client's blood from a blood bank and placed it there. That would be a more reasonable argument to make than to say they did it. They clearly did it wrong. They read the results wrong. They have to go with the stolen blood technique. So hopefully you donated blood and we have a record of that, or that's just not believable either. Oh, it is Are You the Father territory. He's the daddy. He's the daddy. Identical twin defense. Oh, yes, there's another one. I forgot about that. Long lost identical twin, separated at birth. Still can't find him, but he's out there somewhere. I can feel it. We need an identical twin to show up, or a doppelganger. Septillion is 215 zeros after the number. No, I don't think it's that many. I think it's just 21, isn't it? 21 zeros. Or you donated blood marrow. Yeah, it's got to be something. Don't give them any ideas. I'm just saying there's so little you can do at this point. Because we're running with the theory the defense is using, which is, I've been framed, according to Robert Tellis. I've been framed in this crime. I did nothing. It was somebody else. I've been framed. To make that believable, you have to overcome the evidence that has been presented against you. And that evidence includes video evidence of somebody who matches, according to his, people who associated with him, his gait, his walking style, his body build, his clothing type that he wore, his shoes, the vehicle that seems to match. You've got all these things that add up against it, and now we have this huge, irrefutable, I would say, scientific match on the DNA, and you have to overcome that as well. So how do you explain that? What is to my knowledge, he doesn't have an identical twin, or we would have heard of that by now. We also have to, look at the fact that a lot of the evidence that was found at the crime scene matches what appears to match what was seen on the camera as the assailant walked to and from the crime scene. The blood on the stuff, that is a point in the defendant's favor. I'll say this. There is no victim's blood that we've heard of yet on anything that was found at his house. Not in his car, not on the shoes, not on the hat, not on the scissors, nothing on the knife. I don't think the knife was used. But that's in his favor, because you're like, hey, if it was that vicious of an attack, wouldn't there be some blood from him on me? Or on whatever I was wearing, if that was me? And without actually seeing the attack and seeing that whether there was or wasn't blood profusely spread about the crime scene as it was taking place, and on the assailant, that's just speculation. I don't know. He looks like an evil twin, says Allie. The problem is he looks like the evil twin. The other twin's the good one, right? Thank you for those who are doing the math. I will tell you right now, I asked you to do the math, and it still makes 0 sense to me. There's too many numbers. My brain just looks at it and says, pass, pass, pass. Check your text, says Lynn. I will. Okay, text. The burner phone is clogged up. let's see, he's being framed. He would have to be an idiot to leave this much evidence behind. It's too easy. Also, why didn't the defense do a comparison video of the man, his size, walking down the street, put it side by side to the original to show the height difference? I'm not sure if they have... to set up that test, you'd have to have him willing to participate in an environment where you could control the variables, the camera lens, the angle, the distance, the probably even the lighting, and then you'd have to have him walk in a way that wasn't consciously different from how he normally walks. It would be very hard to set that up, although we might be able to find some video and do our own comparison that way. Thanks, Big Mike, for that. Let's see, Weatherwatch's rap name is Doppelganger. Who sent me that? We got the response about their Sarah Boone. I'm not seeing what you're pointing me to, Lynn. I've got a bunch of texts, but I'll have to look for it. So defense is going for police setup. Yes, Pauline, very much so. The only problem is this Las Vegas Police Department and the associated crime scene technicians are phenomenal. They are extremely well trained. They're very well educated. They follow procedure. We don't have any solo cups. We don't have any stop and shop bags. We don't have any leaf blowers. The things that we would normally look for in a case, like we saw in the Karen Reed's thing, where we can introduce doubt in the investigation, are not there. Instead, we have very thorough reports that were timely filed by experienced law enforcement personnel who are well trained, and a chain of custody that was meticulously tracked. I mean, where's the weak link? I'm not seeing it. I just am not seeing it at all. It's not SLED, no. There's a reason, I guess, people go to Las Vegas to get trained. Apparently, Las Vegas does it right. Whether or not they learn anything when they're there, well, that's the other thing. Then it's still sending it. I'll watch for it to arrive. I'll watch for it. The hat is interesting. The hat, the orange vest and the hat. We have no evidence about the orange vest yet, which was it was a coat. It was not like a mesh vest, right? This was a protective overcoat, which may have had blood on it and possibly was disposed of somewhere, somehow. I don't know. I mean, I imagine if pieces of it turned up shredded in the sewer system, we might say, hey, it might have been cut up at the residence and flushed down the toilet. I don't think we're going to get any evidence on that, or else we would have probably heard about that already in the openings. But the vest is missing, and that's probably the most likely thing to have blood on if he did it. What trial was it where they went to Las Vegas to train? That was in the George Kelly trial, the Border Patrol, or not the Border Patrol, the border shooting case, where the rancher shot. That ended in a mistrial, dismissed with prejudice. The dismissal with prejudice has been appealed, and I think we're still pending that decision. K-Rab, the guy who got 558 day for contempt, who was back in front of Judge Simpson 2 days ago, if you want to visit it. We did go, I think we watched that together. He was very penitent. He had a change of heart. It's amazing what a long prison sentence can do for somebody when it comes to perspective. But he didn't have nearly the same four-letter words to say to Judge Cedric Simpson as he came back, hat in hand, so to speak, begging for his freedom. Judge was actually pretty nice, and I loved, if you watch that, if you go back and watch it on the replay, I loved the effort the judge put into that to understand the situation, instead of just looking at it on face value on what happened in court, which he could have done. It's like, I could care less what your story is. You came in here and dropped the F-bomb 7 times at me. You're serving 558 days. He didn't do that. Instead, he said, look, I did some research. I found out you're homeless. I found out that, you've had a really rough period right now. And, and he just, I loved that he connected with him and made a deal and still held him accountable. Perhaps he wore the orange coat so blood wouldn't show up as much as he was walking away. Yes, the orange coat is like day glow bright. Okay, this is what construction workers wear, so those drivers are like, whoa, what's up ahead? Oh my goodness, avoid. Everyone looks away. It's just too bright, especially on a sunny day. might have been really cool. Most people would think, hey, if you're going to commit a crime, wear camouflage and hide. But instead, he went with the opposite approach, which was, props to the assailant. All of Simpson's feeds have been taken down. He does that every time he goes viral. He deletes all his feeds. He likes, he's on the internet for a reason, It's his choice to live stream his trials. Many of the other judges in that district, they do not live stream their trials. It's his choice. He likes it. He likes the views. But at the same time, every time he goes viral, he's like, hey, you shouldn't be doing that. That's my video. And he takes it all down, which is like, trying to delete something on the internet after it's been up. It's there. I see you guys are still doing the math for me. You'll have to please explain it to me as you would a child and use a crayon. That's about my level of where I am when we're talking about that. All right, we are expected back in court in just 4 minutes ago. As we said, the judge is always late here. Monitoring the 2 feeds we have going. Explain to me like I'm 5 times 10 to the 24th. Greeners, keep it simple for me. They say if you wear a jacket like that, people will presume you're on legitimate work business and let you go anywhere. Okay, Ola, this is true. I have one of these vests. What does mine say on the back? It doesn't say police or anything, because that can actually, impersonate an officer, that can get you in trouble. But I think mine says event staff or something on the back. And man, I've got lots of places with that. We're back. Mine is the light vest, the little Velcro over vest that you can see through.
Right there, roll, please be seated. Please come to order. Remain seated. Court is now back in session.
Good job, bailiff. Nailed it that time.
States stipulate to the presence of the panel. Yes, Your Honor. And the defense.
Yes, Your Honor.
You may begin your cross-examination.
It's weird that the jury comes in before the judge in this courtroom. It's the only place I've seen that.
Ma'am, is it fair to say that DNA can be recovered from a fairly small sample?
Yes.
Blood carries a fair amount of DNA as compared to other bodily fluids, skin cells such as that.
Yes, blood, what we consider that a biological fluid, and that does typically have more DNA present than, like you just mentioned, skin cells or something sloughing on.
Okay, when we talk about skin cells, those are epithelial cells?
They are referred to epithelial cells and or skin cells. There's cells all over our body, and within those cells is where the DNA resides. So our skin is constantly sloughing off as well.
And are you able to determine the source of the DNA that you test? And meaning, did it come from blood? Did it come from semen? Did it come from epithelial cells, saliva? Are you able to make that determination?
My analysis cannot give the source of that DNA profile.
But just so we're clear, though, is it your opinion that blood is perhaps the richest carrier of DNA?
Opinion?
It's the best vehicle to preserve and to transport DNA.
Biological fluids, to include blood, semen, and saliva, all are good. They all contain good amounts of DNA. So we typically expect there to be a lot of DNA. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I'm never going to know what that profile looks like until the analysis is actually done. But biological fluids do contain more DNA.
We'll start with what's up on the overhead projector. This is State's Exhibit 149.
Okay.
You had tested, it was the rocks and the bird bath, correct?
Yes, there were rocks and various swabs, I believe, within this diagram that were submitted for forensic testing.
And so we're clear, there were no findings concerning the reference sample, that being Mr. Tellis.
For referencing that last report?
Correct.
Yes, that is correct.
Turning your attention to State's Exhibit 166. This was the clothing that was taken from the body of Mr. Gehrman. Same question. There was no DNA consistent with that of Mr. Tellis found on the shoes.
Correct. He was excluded as a contributor.
Underwear. Same question.
Same answer. Yes, he was excluded.
The shorts.
He was excluded.
The T-shirt.
Also excluded.
Turning your attention to the latter part of your testimony concerning the swabs that were obtained from the subject vehicle. You had testified that swabs were taken from the interior driver door of the vehicle. That would be impound item number 1, item number 27.
Let's look at all the places where there was no
Sorry,
evidence.
I'm just referencing my report, so I don't
Please do,
speak.
yes.
I apologize. Yes, so impound item 1, yes, swab from the interior driver door handle pull, yes.
There was, number 1, a negative presumptive blood test, correct?
Correct.
So there was no presumptive, there was a negative test on the presumptive blood test from that item, item number 27, impound item number 1, correct?
That is correct. It was a negative presumptive test for blood.
As to impound item number 2, and that would be item number 28 from the lab item, that was taken from the driver's seatbelt and the buckle from the vehicle, correct?
That is correct, yes.
Again, there was a negative presumptive blood finding.
That is correct.
And again, no DNA.
For item 28, lab item 28, DNA profile was obtained, but as I mentioned earlier, assuming Robert Tellis, that foreign component was too limited.
And again, concerning Mr. Gehrman, there was no DNA found concerning, from the reference sample that you had concerning Mr. Gehrman, correct?
Correct. I actually didn't even compare Jeffrey Gehrman's DNA to lab item 28 because the remainder, after I assumed Robert Tellis, the remainder is too limited. So there actually was no comparisons. But yes.
In reference to lab item number 29, impound item number 3, swab from the steering wheel, again, negative presumptive blood test.
That is correct, yes.
And again, no findings of any meaning in reference to DNA concerning Mr. Gehrman.
Correct. He was uninformative, as I talked about earlier, for that sample.
Turning your attention to item number 30, that's the lab item, impound item number 4, the swab from the gear shifter of the vehicle, negative presumptive blood test.
Correct, yes.
And again, no DNA of any significance concerning Mr. Gehrman.
Correct. For lab item 30, the foreign component was too limited, so he wasn't even compared to that item.
Turning your attention to item number 31, that's the lab item, impound item number 5, the swab from the gas pedal of the subject vehicle. Again, negative presumptive blood test.
That is correct, yes.
And again, in reference to the DNA sample, nothing for any meaningful comparisons.
Yes, for lab item 31, the sample as a whole was too limited, so there were no further interpretations.
Turning your attention to lab item number 32, impound item number 6. This is the swab from the brake pedal versus the gas pedal. Negative presumptive blood test.
That is correct, yes.
And again, no meaningful findings concerning DNA contributors.
Correct. For that item of evidence, lab item 32, Jeffrey Gehrman was uninformative.
Lab item number 33, impound item number 7, the swab for the interior front passenger handle door. Again, negative presumptive blood test.
Correct.
And again, we don't have Mr. Gehrman's DNA or any findings of any significance concerning Mr. Gehrman.
Correct. He was excluded as a contributor.
Lab item number 34, impound item number 9. That was a swab from the interior rear driver door handle pulled from the vehicle. Again, negative presumptive blood test.
That is correct, yes.
And no meaningful DNA findings concerning Mr. Gehrman.
Correct. That profile as a whole was limited, so there were no comparisons to it.
Turn your attention to State's Exhibit 285.
They swabbed the entire car and basically found nothing.
No, just so we're clear, no presumptive blood tests of any significance. Nothing was conducted, actually, but please.
So for the straw hat, referencing my report, excuse me, the pieces were impounded separately, and at the time this item was screened or examined, excuse me, there were a few areas that were screened for blood. They were all negative presumptive blood tests.
And again, same question concerning the sample reference to Mr. Gehrman, nothing. You
Correct.
said it was, I mean, there was a mixture of 5 or more.
Yes.
It was complex, but nothing felt, oh, there's blood or there's a finding or epithelial cells concerning Mr. Gehrman.
Correct. Item 20.1, there was no testing for presumptive blood for that sample. And as I mentioned earlier, it was too complex, so there were no comparisons made to that sample.
Turning your attention to State's Exhibit 272. This is the partial right shoe.
Okay.
No findings of DNA concerning the reference sample taken from Mr. Gehrman.
That is correct. For that sample, was excluded. Jeffrey Gehrman was excluded.
Turning your attention to State's Exhibit 263. Left shoe. As far as the presumptive blood test, negative.
Referencing lab items, so the left shoe is referenced for lab items 13 and 14. Both of those were negative presumptive blood tests.
And again, in reference to the sample from Mr. Gehrman, negative. Concerning the DNA.
Correct. He was
excluded.
Excluded, yes. And he was excluded from lab item 13, and actually lab item 14 was not taken forward for analysis.
Showing you what's been marked and admitted as State's Exhibit 274. In reference to the DNA reference sample from Mr. Gehrman, excluded, not included. There's no DNA from Mr. Gehrman found on these pieces.
Yes, I believe that is most likely the lab item 16 swab from piece of black, white, and gray rubber. And yes, you are correct. Jeffrey Gehrman was excluded.
State's Exhibit 261. These were the scissors. There was presumptive blood concerning the handles, correct? Top and bottom.
Yes, the scissors reference lab items 17 and 18. They were initially identified as AB5 and AB6. Both of those were positive presumptive for apparent blood, for blood.
But when compared to the sample reference taken from Mr. Gehrman, excluded.
Yes.
I'm showing you what's been marked and admitted. I can anticipate your answers, but I want to just show you this. This is a bag found from the residence of Mr. Tellis. Was anything submitted to you to perform an analysis, either presumptive blood or DNA?
For this bag, no.
Based upon your working with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, would you assume that had there been a presumptive finding, I would have been submitted for further analysis?
Those sorts of decisions are made outside of the purview of my job, so that would be dependent upon the requesting detective or officer who submitted it. So there was nothing that was submitted, so I don't have an answer for that. Unfortunately, I don't know why, yes or no.
Fair enough, but as far as to your review of the documents, there's no presumptive blood tests that were conducted upon that bag, correct?
I did not review crime scenes report, so if there was, I don't know.
And again, you were never called upon to render an opinion as to any DNA evidence found upon this bag?
Correct. There was no samples from that bag or the bag itself that were submitted for analysis. What was submitted is what has been discussed today.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
No, Your Honor, thank you.
Did you say no?
No, I'm sorry.
All right, thank you very much for your testimony here today. You may step down if you're excused from your subpoena. Thank you very much for being here. You may call your next witness.
Dan Cullen.
Dan Cullen. Dan Cullen's our next, or something similar to that. Jury in the bad neighbor trial is deliberated for about 2 hours and 11 minutes. No verdict yet. We're keeping an eye on that one for you. If verdict comes in, we'll pause this and portal over to a verdict stream, and then portal back here and get caught up. Somebody suggested that he might have had duplicates of items to throw people off, so that he had identical things. Lobo, I think it was you. Identical outfit. I don't think that's the case. I think there just was not blood on any of his stuff because of how the attack occurred.
Please step up into the witness stand. Remain standing. Raise your right hand, face the clerk.
You do solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give in this action shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
You may be seated. Please state and spell your first and last name for the record.
Daniel Kulin, DanielKulin.
May I proceed, Your Honor? Good morning, sir.
Hi.
Hi. Sir, where were you working back in 2022?
Clark County Communications Office.
And what is the Clark County Communications Office responsible for?
Handling requests from the media and other communications efforts for the county.
Okay, so occasionally members of the media may request information from the county, and it's done through the communications office?
Yes.
Are those called public records requests?
They can be, yeah.
Okay, that's one form of them. And so,
Yes,
sorry.
I'm sorry.
Thank you, Your Honor. So if you were a member of the media and you wanted to make a public records request,
or anyone else,
would you go or contact the communications office, or what would the procedure be?
So you would probably call and talk to us about it, and then depending on what the request is, you could also submit an email to kind of put it in writing.
Okay, and are those types of requests, or I guess I should say, did your office receive, when you were working there, several requests or many requests from various reporters on a range of topics?
Yes, frequently.
Was one of those requesters a reporter by the name of Jeff Gehrman?
Yes.
And I think you said they could call or they could email a request to the office?
Yes.
Once the communications office receives the request, what happens with that request on the county side?
Well, we hold it for about 90
days. Well, it depends what they're requesting. So, for example, if they're asking for an email search, the procedure would be to communicate that request to the DA's office as well as IT department, the department, and the individuals that are the subject of the request also, and then to proceed to collect the information.
Okay, so if I did a request or a reporter did a request for emails of, I would assume this would be county employees. Is that yes?
Yes, sorry.
Okay. Your office or where you were working back then would receive the request, is that correct?
Correct.
And then the request, you said, would go to the DA's office?
Correct.
And I assume that's the civil division of the DA's office, not the criminal division?
Correct.
And then you said the IT department, is that right?
Yes.
Because I assume that's the department that's going to collect email or electronic data?
Correct.
And then your office would be in the mix on that as well?
Correct. We facilitate the request, serve as the person or the office that's in communication with the reporters.
And then the person whose email is being requested, are they notified, hey, there's been a public records request for your email?
Yes.
And that notification would be made by the communications office usually?
Typically, yes.
Okay. And I assume then the IT department gathers whatever might be the subject of the request?
Correct.
And then what happens to the data that they gather?
So let's say that it was a request for emails. Once the IT folks have collected all of the potentially relevant documents, they would get reviewed by DA Civil and the communications office to be prepared to be released to the reporter.
Okay. And are there occasions when the civil division of the DA's office may hold back a record or refuse to produce a record for various reasons?
Almost always.
After that, are the records that are going to be produced given to the subject of the request?
Yes,
And then they're allowed to review them before they go out to, say, the reporter?
they could.
Okay. And then after that, I assume they're released to the reporters?
Correct.
Are there numerous requests going through the communications office all the time?
Yes, there were when I was there.
Okay. Your Honor, may I approach? I've shown Mr. Draskovich what's been marked as 339 and 340. Thank you. Sir, I'm going to show you States Exhibits 339 and 340. Do you recognize those two documents?
Yes, these are emails that we received or that I sent.
With respect to 340, that appears to be an email from Jeff Gehrman, is that correct?
Correct.
And that appears to be a request for public records, is that correct?
Yes.
And then with respect to 339, those look like an email and then a response to an email, is that fair?
Correct.
And you're the sender of the email and then you receive an email back, is that correct?
Yes.
State moves to admit 339 and 340.
No objection.
May I publish these, Your Honor? Thank you. I'm putting on the overhead what's been admitted as 340. That looks a little right. Are you able to see that on your screen there?
Yes.
Okay. It looks like it's an email from Jeff Gehrman of the Review Journal. Is that fair?
Yes.
And the date is July 13th, 2022?
Correct.
And it was sent to Eric Papa?
Yes.
Do you know who that is?
Yes.
Who is that?
He was or is another staff member in the communications office. He was the director, or is the director, sorry.
And it appears that Mr. Gehrman says this is an open records request for all emails between Public Administrator Robert Tellis and Estate Coordinator Roberta Lee Kennett from January 1st of 22 to the date that the request is fulfilled. Is that accurate?
Yes.
And he also is requesting communications, including between Tellis and Lee Kennett on Microsoft Teams for that same date span?
Yes.
What is Microsoft Teams?
It's an
inferior chat tool.
Computer program that allows you to send messages between
Is it
people.
similar to email or it's
Yes.
okay. And then it
more like
looks like
Jabber,
please also provide all text messages between Tellis and Lee Kennett on their office and personal phones for that same date time period. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then as a reminder, he wrote, as you know, state law requires a response to open records requests within 5 business days.
5 days.
And then please call me if you have if there's a cost associated with it. Is that all correct?
Correct.
Do you remember this request coming through the communications office back in July of 22?
Yes.
And so would this request have followed that same procedure that you described where once this request came in, it would be forwarded on to IT to collect that electronic data?
Correct.
Also to the civil department of the county to see if they wanted to object to any part of it?
Yeah, correct.
And then also it would have been the fact that the request had been made would have been conveyed to Mr. Tellis and Miss Lee Kennett?
Correct. And in addition, he's asking for things that might not be in our possession, so we would reach out to the subjects of the request so that they have an opportunity to provide anything that we might not have.
Okay. Now, I'm going to put on the overhead, and would those be the text messages from phones? Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm now putting on the overhead states 339. And we'll start with
5 days response time
that's
from a
you
FOIA
sending an
request.
email on August the 8th of 22. Is that correct?
Correct.
And you send an email to Mr. Tellis, looks like at almost 2 o'clock.
Correct.
And you say, Mr. Tellis, we've received a request from the Review Journal for emails between you and Michael Murphy from May 15th to July 13th, and between you and Rita Reed for those same dates. The reporter has also requested emails between you and Roberta Lee Kennett from January 1st to July 13th, as well as Microsoft Teams between the two of you. Those requests are in addition to text messages for that same time period. So you send out a notification that to Mr. Tellis on August the 8th that this request was made?
Correct.
Now the request that we looked at just earlier from Mr. Gehrman, his emailed request, this email suggests that he was seeking additional communications from Mr. Murphy and Rita Reed. Are reporters allowed to call in and I guess adjust the request and say, well, I'm looking for more than what I emailed you?
That's possible, sure.
Okay. And it's, I guess what I'm saying is they don't have to fill out a form and be exact. They can just contact the office either by email or form and say, this is what I want.
That's correct, generally speaking. I mean, we worked a lot with Jeff over the years. So.
Okay. And did you actually know him personally?
Yes.
And had you worked with him prior to your working at the county?
Yes, we were reporters together at the Las Vegas Sun.
Okay. So you were, friends with him, or at least acquaintances, or maybe more than that?
Yes.
Okay. And would the communication between the county office and the reporters, especially ones that were frequent or that you knew, that was a pretty informal back and forth?
Yes.
Okay. And then it's after the request is made, that's where the civil department of the county weighs in and decides legally what they're going to produce or not produce?
Correct, before anything's turned over.
Okay. And then I'm just sort of going back to our Exhibit 339. It looks like you receive a response from Mr. Tellis on that same date saying that I'd like to review those communications prior to them being sent. Please advise as to when I might be able to do so. Is that correct?
Correct.
And that is part of the procedure that the county follows with regard to producing electronic data for reporters?
Correct.
The subject could review them.
When I was there, yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir. I'll pass the witness.
Cross-examination?
Yes.
Yes.
So turning your attention to State's Exhibit 340. This was the initial request that your attention was drawn to, the July 13th, 2022 request from Mr. Gehrman.
Mm-hmm.
You were to comply with this request within how many days?
We would communicate with the requester within 5 days and let them know how long it might take to respond.
And presumably upon receiving this notice from Mr. Gehrman on July 13th, you would have notified Mr. Tellis.
At some point, we would have notified him. The initial steps typically would be to communicate with the reporter to make sure that we're all understanding what they're looking for and see if there's anything that they would like to change or amend.
Do we have any emails from you to Mr. Gehrman right around the 5-day period from July 13th, 2022, being the starting point?
I would have to search for those. I don't know right now.
Okay, but
You
that
have
would
to file
generally
a
be your
FOIA
policy.
request to find out.
Well, it could be communication, we could be calling him or we
Absolutely.
could be emailing him.
And obviously, at this point in time, there was nothing out of the ordinary. You testified previously that you'd communicated with Mr. Gehrman before when he would request for records.
Correct.
So in this case, I mean, it was just the basically standard procedure. You receive a request, you communicate it to the person whose communications are being sought, and then you respond to Mr. Gehrman. Fair to say?
Well, it's more likely that we would communicate with the reporter first to make sure that we are, getting him or her what they want. For example, he's asking for, communications through the date that the request is filled.
Yes.
I probably would have called Jeff and asked him to, identify an end date, a specific end date.
And it's safe to assume that you did that?
It's likely, yes.
And then following that communication based upon your testimony, you would have communicated this request to Mr. Tellis?
Yes, at some point in the process, we would communicate to the subjects of the request.
In reference to the communication, the second communication that we have in writing on August 8th, again, we have a large request. He's asking for a broader scope of communications. The initial request was between Mr. Tellis and Miss Lee Kennett, correct?
The email that you just showed?
Yes,
Correct.
the 13th. Yes?
Correct.
Okay. This request concerns communication between other individuals.
Correct.
In this point, we obviously have, it's safe to assume that you had spoken with Mr. Gehrman and now you're speaking with Mr. Tellis, correct?
Correct.
But digitally speaking with him, I mean, you sent an email.
Correct.
And his request to review these is normal course, nothing out of the ordinary.
It's not something that every subject of a request asks for, but it's not unheard of.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
No, Your Honor, thank you. Thank you very much for your testimony here today.
The
Can
frequent
you step
changing of the
down?
facial expression by the defendant
I'm sorry. You're going to stay right here for a minute. We have a question from a juror.
makes it look like he's trying to wave his ears. I don't know what else he's trying to do. I can't wiggle my ears. I'm jealous. Elizabeth said, I can. His facial expressions are so dynamic, it appears to me like it's intentional. Like this isn't just like... this is like he's intentionally making the face. Jury question coming in. Love juror questions. Normally don't comment about people's appearance very much. So I wasn't going to say anything about like two lonely caterpillars in the Sahara Desert, but his facial expressions are drawing me to his eyebrows as they go all over the place. I'm sorry. I shouldn't do that. Okay, the jurors are going to approach as the court reviews the question with the lawyers. Mrs. R.A. is listening. Right. I know if you're on social media at all, you know that this trial is spawning a billion memes.
Okay, we have a question from a juror. It's been marked as court's exhibit number 14. Do you recall how many times Gehrman requested communications through you directly, and how often, weekly, monthly?
I couldn't give you an exact number, but Jeff was an investigative reporter, and so it was common for him to reach out and make public records requests. But I wouldn't be able to give you an exact number without researching it.
Okay, it's been marked and made part of the record. This court's Exhibit 14. Does the state have any follow-up?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
Does the defense?
Yes. In reference to these requests, in other cases, you would have individuals assert a privilege or somehow try and bar the transference of the communications.
The subjects of the request?
Yes.
I can't recall specific instances of that occurring, but yes, that is something that has occurred. I'm not aware of it being successful, though.
And in reference to these requests that were made by Mr. Gehrman, there were no objections or any attempts by Mr. Tellis to stop the transference of his communications, correct?
I don't recall.
Maybe.
Is there an objection here? That was the state saying, may we approach based on there was no attempts to stop the transfer of information. I love juror questions. They just have the highest likelihood of being asking what's on my mind. That's why I love them so much. I do have laptop envy for the lady who has the marble Apple laptop. I think it's just like a sticker cover, but bench conference ensuing. Short.
Okay, thank you very much for your testimony here today. You may step down. And you're excused from your subpoena. Thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you.
State may call their next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. The state calls Roberta Lee Kennett.
Roberta Lee. I think at this point, Pat, if the defendant was offered a plea deal where he had to plead guilty to the full charges and get 1 day less than the maximum sentence, I think he should take it.
Please watch your step. And if you'll remain standing, raise your right hand, face the clerk, please.
You do solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give this action shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. You may be seated. Please state and spell your first and last name for the record.
We're seeing some motion in the neighborhood trial, and it might be verdicty.
Roberta Lee-Kennett.
May I proceed, Your Honor? Do you want me to call you Ms. Lee-Kennett or Ms. Kennett?
Lee-Kennett's fine.
Okay. Yeah. Ms. Lee-Kennett, were you ever employed at the public administrator's office?
Yes, I was.
And I'm sorry, but you have a soft voice. Can you just keep it up a little bit or pull that maybe a little closer?
Yes, I was.
Thank you. Do you remember what year it was that you started working there?
I've been with the county 12, 13 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was that your first job at the county?
I worked for the public guardian's office first.
Public guardians and then public administrators?
Yep, a few years after that.
Okay. When you started working at the public administrator's
pause.
office,
I think
who was the elected public administrator at that time?
That would have been John Cahill.
Okay. At some point, Mr. Cahill decides not to be the public administrator, and a new one comes in. Is that fair?
Yep.
And who was that?
Robert Tejas.
Okay. And you looked over at council table. Do you see him in the courtroom?
Yes.
Could you describe an article of clothing and point to him, please?
I've got a suit right there.
Like on
gray suit.
Thank you. Thank you. What was your job title at the public administrator's office?
Estate Coordinator 2.
And as an estate coordinator, can you just give the members of the jury like an idea of what your responsibilities were, what you did?
It was our responsibility to administer probates, estates assigned to us.
Okay, estates assigned to you. And some people may have familiarity with that. Did that involve houses of people that maybe died with not immediate heirs?
It would be decedents who had any.
We're pausing right here because I think we have a verdict in the other case. So we're going to quickly wrap up. I'm going to give me just 1 second. We're going to portal over to that trial. I've already got a thumbnail built. I'm just activating it right now because I think we have a verdict. I'm going to call it here. They've asked for family to come in and everything. Details. Make that public so you can see that. Done. I think I'm going to put a question mark because I'm not exactly sure. And now we're going to portal over. So hold tight. We'll be right back. We're going to catch up with the TELUS trial in just one moment. But let me build the link. I'm getting better at this. Okay. Add. We're portaling. Save. All right. Tonight when you go home, please hug the people you love. Smile at someone. Make that day just a little bit better. And please stay safe till we go live in moments with what we think might be a verdict in the bad neighbor trial in Florida. You guys hang tight. We're going to portal over there. We'll see you there in just a second. Alrighty. I don't have a picture. We're just gonna fade it out this way. We'll see you guys. Bye bye.